the beginning of one of Welles' most spectacular opening sequences. It develops into a continuous 3-minute, 20-second crane shot. Welles had been living and working in exile in Europe for nearly 10 years when he returned to Hollywood in 1958 to create, almost by accident, one of his most unforgettable screen performances and one of the finest crime thrillers ever made. The script had originally been sent by Universal to Charlton Heston under the title Badge of Evil.
It was a fairly routine police story, but even had it been a better script, as I pointed out to them, with the exception of Westerns, they've been making police stories longer and oftener than any other single genre. And therefore, it's extremely difficult to come up with a script which, as a script, will survive on its own. I said, the director is even more important in this than in most kinds of pictures. I said, who's going to direct it? They said, well, we haven't picked a director yet. We have Orson Welles to do the heavy, though. This was on the long-distance phone, and after a static-filled pause, I said, why don't you have him direct it? He's a pretty good director, you know. And the reaction at first was a prolonged silence, as though I had suggested that my mother direct the film. And after a while, they said, yeah, that's right. We'll get back to you.
So they quickly called me back again and said, will you direct this picture? We can't pay you anymore. I said, I'll direct it, but if I also get to write it, every word of it, an entirely new script. They said, yes. So I had 3 weeks before we were supposed to start. I hired about 12 secretaries round the clock and made an entirely new script.
Orson then proceeded to rewrite the entire script in about 10 days by himself, which I knew he would, and vastly improved the whole script and his part, which I knew he would. The Touch of Evil is, of course, really the story of the decline and fall of Captain Quinlan, Orson's part. My part, the Mexican lawyer, Vargas, serves as a witness.
He must be physically the most grotesque character.
Yes, it's pretty grotesque. And I gave a dinner party not long after I started the picture for all my old producer friends and big star friends, the old Hollywood brigade. My wife laid on a splendid meal, and I was a little late, so they were all there having their drinks before we would sit down. I came in order to arrive in time in my makeup and costume. And they all said, how are you, Orson? You're looking great. And you know, I was an absolute monster.
You've been cooking at this hour?
Just cleaning up.
Oh.
You a mess, honey.
They didn't know they had Marlene Dietrich. She turned up in the rushes. They said, that's Marlene Dietrich. And they called her up and said, you're in this picture. And she said, yes. And they said, well, what's your salary? And she says, you don't put my name on the picture, it's the minimum. You put my name on, see my agent. So they saw her agent, they were delighted. And it was roses all the way until that gate closed on me. It's still a mystery. I have no idea what that was about.
Once again, Welles was barred from the post-production of his own film, and cuts were made in it. Why again in this case were you shut out from?
I have no idea. It's never been explained. Because they loved the rushes. Every day the head of the studio came to me and wanted me to come to the office and sign a deal for several pictures, and oh, it's great stuff. Then they saw a rough cut of it, and they were so horrified that they wouldn't let me in the studio. And nobody's ever explained what horrified them. They tried very hard really to stop it. Heston had won an Oscar and was a great star, and they released it without a press release, without press showing. Second on the bill with a B picture in America. And it was shown in Brussels right afterwards. at the World's Fair, where it got the prize for the best picture of the year. And the distributor, the Belgian distributor who had put it into the contest against the will of the studio and had worked for Universal for 20 years, was fired. It then opened in a small theater in Paris, Publicis, where it ran 2 years. It's made a lot of money, even in America, to their tremendous rage. You know, the last thing they wanted was a success, and nobody has ever explained it to me. Chuck Heston doesn't know. They never told him. They certainly never told me. We don't know what it is. It was too dark for them, too strange, too, I think, you know. I don't think we would have had that reaction now. They're a little too tough, a little too black. But that's a guess. I just don't know.
Orson really, it seems to me, just wants to work. But at the same time, there is something in him that drives him to alienate the people with the money. Perhaps there is a subconscious streak that makes him resent that, unlike a painter, who, if he had to, could work in a supermarket bagging groceries and earn the money to buy paints, that as a director, he cannot do that. He must somehow persuade a studio to give him the money. And perhaps on some subconscious level, Orson has never been able to accept this. I cannot believe that he would not have been more successful than he has been at getting them to give him the money to make films. There is a myth in the film community, for example, that Orson is an unreliable director, that he is profligate, with no disrespect to directors like Mike Nichols and Michael Cimino and Spielberg and Coppola. Orson hasn't spent as much money in all the films he has made in his life as they have wasted in overage on any one film. And this is a simple statement of fact, and I dare say they would subscribe to it. Touch of Evil, not a great film, but certainly one marked with patches of brilliance, was shot on the shortest schedule I ever worked on. And it came in on schedule and slightly over budget. The budget was less than $1 million.
Was it? Yes. It also, so much of it gives very little room for maneuver. I mean, the famous opening shot is one shot.
The Chapman boom shot, yes.
He didn't, did he cover himself?
No, no. We spent all night shooting that shot. If you look in the printed take, you can see the touches of dawn breaking on the horizon. That was the last shot you were going to get of that.
Was it that, and he used the last take?
Yes. The hard thing about that shot was the small part player who played the customs inspector at the very end of the shot kept blowing his lines, which is, if one can understand, he would see this vast entourage bearing down on him from 2 blocks away. And finally, Orson said to him, "Look, I don't care if you forget the lines." He said, "Just move your lips." He said, "I beg of you, just don't say, 'Oh, gee, Mr. Welles, I'm sorry.'" But it is one of many remarkable strokes in that film.
You folks American citizens?
Yes, our viewers will know that because this is on film, there are conversations that go on between reloading. And somebody said that Touch of Evil seemed very unreal and yet real. And I corrected that statement and said what I was trying to do was to make something which was unreal but true. And I think that's the definition of the highest kind of theatricality, the best kind. And that's the kind of theatricality that can exist in films, too, as well as theater. And I think, because there is, you know, what is more unreal and stylized than Cagney. It's a totally stylized, unreal performance. No human being ever behaved the way he does. And every moment of Cagney, entire life in films is truth. He never had a second that wasn't true. You know, now that's the. And he certainly was larger than life. He did everything dangerously and, you know, as though he were playing in Madison Square Garden, and it was always cinematically true, but unreal. That's the difference, I guess, I think.
There's always that, for the viewer anyway, that a kind of moral ambiguity about the characters in the Quinlan
Yes.
character, that although he's sort of vile.
Well, you know what
vicious,
Renoir said? He said everyone has his reasons. And that really sums it up. You know, there's no villain who doesn't have his reasons. And the bigger the villain, the more interesting it becomes the further you explain his villainy, not psychiatrically, not because Mama didn't love him, but because you humanize him. The more human you make the monster, the more interesting the story must be, it seems to me.
Also, Quinlan's instincts turn out to be right, even though the methods he uses
right.
are wrong.
You see, his method is totally wrong, and my position in a political or moral sense is completely anti-Quinlan. I'm absolutely on the side of Heston, myself personally. But playing Quinlan and having a character like that, I had to make him a real person. I've been trapped into a true person. Or what I hope is a true person, a true monster, because he was a successful cop, using means which do work, but which are simply against every good instinct that we have in a democratic world. He's everything we hate. But he isn't what we hate, it's his method. And yet he would never have got those people behind bars if he hadn't done it. And it's that ambiguity which gives tension to a story, you know, that ambivalence, rather.
You also allow him this fantastic epitaph at the end.
Yes, yes. Well, she was pretty good casting for that.
She was some kind of a woman.
Yes. It's her last great performance, no doubt about it.
Goodbye, Tanner.
Adios.
Got another flawed masterpiece?